Hello, welcome to this episode of Fatherly Insights. I'm Brian. This is all part of the Dad Say No More channel. Today, I'm going to introduce you to my second daughter, Bailey. If you haven't realized, the theme of these podcasts so far has been about growth. It's kind of like how we, as dads, can continuously grow. It's not so much where we start at in our journey as being a father, but it's more about how we continue to grow and that we leave that legacy behind with our children. So Bailey is 18 now. She's been there for most of the 19 years that we've been together as a family, and she's watched me kind of like go through this whole path throughout the time. So to start with, we'll start with what Bailey like remembers me as a father in her younger years, and I told her she has complete freedom to discuss not all the great points, but she can discuss any points she wants. So Bailey, how would you say, starting out as a father, where was I, or how would you describe that to our audience?
I don't know, authoritative is like a word that comes to mind.
Authoritative, yeah, and that's a word I would use too. Yeah. So
Like, either did things the way they were supposed to be done or there were consequences type thing.
how did that like make you feel as a young child?
I was constantly scared of messing up.
I mean, they joke around. If I snap my fingers, they still get the like chills, or they
They
get goose.
junk, but it's not like.
Yeah. So I mean, that's one way I used to get attention because I'm not a whistler, right?
Mhm.
But I have a very loud snap, and when I snap my fingers, I could get their attention. And so when we're in large crowds or something like that, I had a very distinct crack to my snapping,
Mhm.
and I could get their attention real quick. And like Bailey has joked around like just a couple weeks ago about how if I were to snap my fingers now, she's like it still gives me goosebumps. So as a young child, being scared, did you feel like you were living a comfortable life, or
I mean, I never lived an uncomfortable life. It was just I felt like I was always like walking on my tiptoes.
trying to make sure that you always filled whatever my desires were or my standard was?
Yeah.
Um, would you at least say I was consistent with my standards?
Yeah. It was definitely consistent.
I was authoritative, had a consistent standard, which was a little bit easier to live with, and made sure your life wasn't feeling like you're uncomfortable or that you didn't know what was coming next. But at the same time, it was very scary. Kind of
Yeah.
felt a lot of guilt and shame in the same sense. I mean, kind of focus on those words because I feel like that's what authoritarian like leadership does. Is
Mhm.
it makes people feel guilty and shameful, and then they're scared to have that feeling again.
Yeah.
And those are feelings that can like cause some negative impact in relationships. um, so with that, can you give us some stories of like how that was?
I mean, it's hard to think of stuff like off the top of my head.
You regress them that or repress them that far?
I don't know. Really can't think of any. Like I know how I felt, I just can't.
It's a good lesson itself, right? We don't always remember all the actions or the events that happen, but we do remember the way that people make us feel. And she can remember very vividly about the way I made her feel, but she doesn't have an exact story right now to kind of describe that. I remember one time you spilled water in your car seat. This is one you kind of talk about every once in a while. You want to
Yeah.
share that story, maybe?
Yeah, we were like in a car trip. I don't remember the details, but I remember like spilling the water on my car seat and you were like so upset because the car was all wet and everything was a mess. That you took us in and you yelled at me and you spanked me and like after that whenever I mean even to this day whenever I have a liquid in the car I'm like shaking to make sure it doesn't spill.
Right. And is that like the stress that probably doesn't allow you to be more yourself nowadays? And I think it's important that I recognize that was not how I wanted to parent, right?
Yeah.
So I grew from there. It took me a few years to like really get into a place where I could actually like learn to be better. Around what age do you think you started noticing the difference in how we parented?
Really after we went to Maranatha, I think that was around the time where Brantley started being more like outspoken on her feelings.
Okay.
And like I think it was more so just like seeing the outcome of how we were treated.
So that age, you were fifth grade,
Seventh.
seventh grade. All right. So you're a little bit older than when Brantley says she noticed it, but that's fair because I don't think I've ever treated any of the children the same. Like I've always treated different children different ways. And me and Bailey were so much alike, but that also means that we're so much alike. And a lot of the things that I saw in myself that I didn't like, I've seen her in Bailey over the years. But in the same sense, a lot of things I do like about myself, I've seen in Bailey too. But during that time, those years, I was really struggling with who I was. And it was more when I started getting more mindful of my feelings and started recognizing that I wasn't in a good place that I think I really started
Mhm.
like treating Bailey better than I had in the past. It was less authoritarian and more about recognizing Bailey's feelings also and more of an empathetic type leadership or
Well, as a parent overall, I definitely noticed you started to change after your dad died.
right.
But
I wouldn't say that was for the better. I was pretty
yeah,
absent, right?
but the change to who you are, like who you are now, was definitely around like seventh grade.
Right. Yeah. And that's of course these are always fair assessments because they're their own assessments. They're it's not based on my view of myself that I'm trying to get out there. It's the view of the people around me and the idea that legacy is not about who we are, what we accomplish in ourselves, but legacy is about what we leave behind us, right?
Mm-hmm.
And my dad dying, there was a couple years there where I was just extremely absent as a parent, just emotionally absent. I went back to work, and work treated me pretty not great. I mean, they immediately put me back to work, dealing with death and dying patients with the same type of disease process as my dad was going on. I never got a chance to like really, despite asking over and over again for help, I never was given a chance to go get help. My leadership at that time in the military were very much, well, we need you to do the mission, and if you can't do the mission, then you can't be in the army. And I didn't want to give up the army because I knew it had benefits to go
Mm-hmm.
along with it, right?
Yeah.
Um, I mean, and that was just the way the army was at that moment in time. And then when I did finally reach out for help, my leaders continued to like put obstacles in my way that were would have prevented me from continuing my career. I mean, trying to write up referred OERs and stuff like that. So I was really struggling at work, and all these things were all happening at once. And it wasn't until I kind of started standing up for myself and starting
Mm-hmm.
like going to above their heads in the chain of command that I really started like getting a reprieve. And it was at that time I'm like, I can't continue to live my life the way I was. I can't continue to not be happy with
Yeah.
myself. So I had to make changes. And that changes had to start with me and it had to start at home. It couldn't start at work. I wasn't going to get the support I needed at work to make those changes. So it had to start at home and it had to start with me. Part of that is Christina, my wife, became a lot more empathetic about the situation I was going through. She had never seen anyone go through those type of situations before.
Mm-hmm.
She was starting to understand more why I was being acting the way I was, and my kids started seeing that change in me too. And so, what's the major difference between the authoritarian to where we're at now? How would you describe that?
It's definitely a lot more like laid back now. And that's definitely not a bad thing. I think you're more worried about like making our home a safe space than it is like making a like obviously the main goal is making us like valuable people in society.
Good humans, right?
Yeah,
I want you all to be good humans, and whatever that definition is for each of them, I want them to find their own definition of what a good human is.
but it's not really focusing on being the perfect human. It's more on being who you are.
Right? Yeah, yeah, and I really I always wanted them to be able to express themselves, and I always wanted them to be able to experience things with me. As I raised the children, I knew in the beginning if they were going to experience bad things or good things, I wanted to be there with them as they experience, so I could be there to help them and guide them, and really kind of pass along my own values upon them. In order to do that, I really had to start building relationships. So I became less focused on making sure they were doing the right thing and more focused on making sure I was there to help them find the right thing to do. and I've spent more time building relationships with them by listening more than anything else. I think that's probably
Yeah.
the biggest difference. Instead of me telling you exactly what to do and how to do it, I spent more time listening to you and allowing you to think through your own problems. Would you say that's true?
Hmm.
And how did that like change feel to you?
Like I've seen you grow, and I can say, looking at it now, you've definitely grown a lot. But in the moment, I never noticed it. But when I did notice it, like 2 years ago, I remember like we were up late, and I was just talking about like The Sims and how much I enjoyed like all the new stuff in The Sims 4. And then the next day, you started to play around with The Sims 4, even though you haven't touched it in years. And that moment where it seems like very minuscule was like, after that, I knew like what I said to you, you cared about.
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of The Sims 4. I like Sims 3 much better.
Yeah.
But you know, it's not so much that what I care about or don't care about. If my daughters or any of my children care about something, I want to at least give it a try and show them that I have an interest in them. Not so much in what they're doing or what they're saying, but I want to show them I have an interest in them as a person. And if they value something, I want to at least try it out and give it that a good college try, we'll call it,
Yeah.
right? I'll give it an effort. And I do think that speaks volumes. And it's not always the words you say. I don't think the
Hmm.
words I ever said have had anywhere near the impact as the small things that I kind of do, that kind of show
Yeah.
things. And it's a lot of times it's not intentional in the fact that I'm going to tell myself I'm going to do this one action and it's going to make this impact. A lot of times it's just the natural actions that kind of occur when you care about someone and you want to kind of like be a part of their life.
Hmm.
And I think that's and I like to talk about the emotional piggyback, right? All those small deposits, the best ones happen naturally, and they're never you never really get the response you think you are when you're putting in a deposit.
Hmm.
It's the fact that the deposits kind of build up over time, and you'd be surprised about which ones they reflect on the most as being like those key moments. And seldom is the ones I think it was. Like I've gone to dance recitals over the years, and I've gone to all these other things, but she knew I was uncomfortable during those, especially when you're struggling with the PTSD and stuff like that, and
Yeah.
the large crowds. And if you don't understand PTSD, a lot of PTSD is not so much you reliving those moments, is when you hit that fight or flight, that uncomfortable state. A lot of your PTSD, people who suffer from it, they can't shut it off.
Hmm.
You're just so used to reliving stressful moments that everything you go through, when it is a little bit stressful, it becomes over exaggerated. And in those moments, like when I'm in a large crowd, we tried the fair or a jump house free play thing, right? And there, instead of there being like dozens of people, there was hundreds of people, and that triggered me. Not so much because of the event itself, but because I wasn't prepared. I did not mentally prepare myself for such a large
Yeah.
event. And like my family realized it right away, and they're very empathetic towards it. And we were able to manage, and I was able to use my coping mechanisms to get through it. Not comfortably, but I got through the moments, right? So with that in mind, like with Bailey, she always had that idea that I like these things, but those are not the moments that are, I think, shine the most. I think the moments that are probably shine the most are probably like around the fire pit or
Yeah.
the games that we used to play, right? Another game that one of the games we used to play was very based on like critical thinking, right?
Hmm.
The My World game, and the My World game, I love the My World game because it forces the children to like think about things in a different way. And it's based on the idea that you, as the proctor of the game, for lack of better words, the My World master,
Yeah.
you set up a set of rules, and then you challenge everyone else to figure out what the rules are. In our game, we have very specific rules, and not all my children know what they are, so I'm not going to say what they are out loud. But it took them a while to figure it out. The My World,
Hmm.
and those are like a game where we can play together in those moments like of critical thinking. It helped them grow in their critical thinking methods, but it also was something we did together. It was our little fun way of interacting, and it gave us something to look forward to when we were around the fire pit. Now that you guys have solved it, do you feel like it's less important to be at the fire pit, or
No, I definitely enjoy the fire pit, but it's funny you mentioned the My World because when I was racking my mind for APR ideas, that kept coming up, and it's the idea that like how we when we were told we were little and it just kept coming back up, and it was so hard to notice like the pattern because we were so used to it that we weren't like we thought it would be overly complicated and we weren't looking at the things.
Oh yeah, the pattern was so simple, but it was so hard to realize.
Yeah.
I mean, and they had to change. Not only did they have to change like the way they're thinking about it, but they had to change the way they're trying to solve it to
Yeah.
really solve it.
But like when other people with a more like grown up brain were introduced to it, they would solve it almost instantly.
Not always. So I do use it with my students. My students, on
Yeah.
average, between seven of them can, instead of like two of them, they're a little bit older. My students were adults, young adults mostly.
Hmm.
They were able to figure out within an hour to 2 hours, where it took you guys a couple years.
Yeah. But I think that can reflect back onto like what I was saying about like how you changed over the years. I didn't notice it really, but like someone who just now meets you would be able to see how great of a father you are. And like if I were to tell them the stories of childhood, it would be like, no, that's not the same person.
Right.
But like it's that it was more of a subtle growth.
And that's a very important point. So I recently mentioned, or I briefly mentioned sometimes, my childhood wasn't great. It's not so much that my childhood wasn't great, but my parents were growing as I was growing too. So there was definitely moments in there that where they were going through high stress moments throughout their life, and it led to very authoritarian type
Hmm.
leaderships and stuff like that. But at the same time, they were growing from their base, from where they started, and they continue to grow through time. And through time, I have a great relationship with my mother. At least I would say it's great now, and it's a lot easier to be great because we don't live next to each
Yeah.
other, you know. But I can really talk to my mother about things that I could never talk to her before. But we had her both grow into that. And in my mom's defense, right? She we talk about some of the stories, and they're scary. They're scary to my kids when
Hmm.
they hear those stories. It's but that was where I started from, right? Those stories are kind of like where I started in my parenting path. I don't think I was as drastic as my mother, but I think I had to overcome that and grow through that. And then if you look at my mother, her story was even more harsh than my story. Her father was even more harsh on her, being a man who was heavily abused as a child, lost his parents when he was really young. Um, there's stories that they tell about him, who was he was often passed around his cousins or his uncles as slave labor at a young age, and he was often fed after the dogs and the
Hmm.
animals were fed. Like they wouldn't allow him. He would eat the scraps that the dogs didn't eat, because this was like right after the Great Depression, or where a lot of his childhood was going on. And because he was living through that time when there wasn't much going around, they valued the dogs and the animals more than they valued him, because he wasn't part of their family. He was just there for a short period of time, and while he was there to help.
Hmm.
So I mean, there was this whole like attitude of he's just a burden. So when he grew up and he became a father, he had to grow from that point. He had to go from I'm a burden to everyone and all kids are burdens to the point where he actually showed a lot of love to his children. And as my father or as my grandfather got older in life, he he actually got to the point where he was had very loving relationship with all his children, and all his children really cared for him. And part of his journey is that his wrath or his anger or his rage from his young years, they didn't live into his older years, but they lived through some of their kids and the
Yeah.
way that they acted. In the same sense, that's where my anger issues came from. Is I lived through those too. And as I continued to grow, I became less angry about things. I start being much more mindful of what I was going through,
Hmm.
and I try to work on myself. And that's the struggle of like fatherhood, is that it's not so much where you start. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to do those things that are hurtful. But in
Yeah.
the end, it's not so much that those things can destroy everything that we're building towards. Our children are very forgiving, and as long as we keep trying and we keep growing, we can still have better relationships as we get older. And I think our relationship as I gotten older has gotten a lot better. It's a
Hmm.
lot less scary, right?
Yeah.
Right. And she comes to me with moments of stress, and she looks to me to be like, I don't know if like a shield or maybe a tower in your defense. Sometimes she gets a little bit more response than she wants out of me, not towards her, but towards people who she's having a hard time with. Like, I've tried to teach my children the best way to deal with conflict is to go straight to the problem and try to resolve it themselves. But when can't resolve it herself, when she tries and can't resolve it herself, sometimes she tells me, well, she's learned that sometimes about the way she tells me. If she leaves the impression that she wants me to act, I'm going to act. But
Yeah.
if she lets me know throughout the discussion, I don't want you to act, I don't. So she's gotten better about communicating her desires in that sense. But these first few podcasts, the point I really want to get across to all the fathers out there is that it's about growing together with your children. You don't have to be the same father that you started as with, and you can make mistakes, and you can grow from them.
Hmm.
And that continuous growth, even beyond their when they become adults, you can still build relationships with them. But it does take some mindfulness and it does take some effort to grow those relationships. And the more damage you do to damage, the more withdrawals that you put in from their emotional bank account or their emotional piggy bank when they're younger, the more work it's going to take to like just be there for the small things to kind of rebuild that relationship.
Hmm.
Can you give us a good story about where we're at now, like an example? Or
I don't know where we're at now at the moment, but like,
well, we're in our house. I mean,
yeah.
we're right in front of my computer, so
But I can say, like, you mentioned the emotional piggy bank. That is something that's like stuck with me. Um, so much that it was my whole basis for my AP art. May not have been the exact turn of events, but throughout this like last year, I've really complained about my like college leader person.
your school counselor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like throughout the year it's been complaint after complaint and you've listened to all of them and you sent him an email during the hurricane debacle.
Yeah, we lived through Hurricane Helene, and this gentleman thought that everyone, even though we didn't have power or food, but this gentleman, for some reason, had this idea that the SATs were more important than the lives that their students are living at that moment. I mean, we were going through Hurricane Helene, and I sent an email telling him just how I felt about that.
Yeah.
And I think that spoke volumes to Bailey. But why? Why does it speak volumes?
Because it wasn't just about that moment. Like, when I read back that email, it mentioned every comment I've ever made about him, really. And it was like, you listen to everything I've said about him. And like most of those conversations have just been in passing, like me complaining, like the conversations that most people would just like,
And they weren't always directed towards me either, right?
yeah,
A lot of times you're just complaining in general,
hmm,
and I happen to hear it.
yeah,
Yeah, I could see that. Like, I wasn't just listening when she was talking to me. I was also listening when she was talking to her mom or someone else in my general area.
hmm,
Huh. So yeah, I'm learning now. I didn't realize that. That's what's the reason why that was so impactful for her. I knew the email was impactful because Bailey showed me that was impactful. She also told me something like you're being stupid or something when I read at the email. Like, don't do that. I think it changed his attitude towards the students though. I mean,
yeah,
I'm probably not the only one that's let him know how we felt about that. I'm sure there's other parents too,
hmm.
but he has since like backed down in the idea that college life is the most important thing when our young children are going through a natural disaster.
Well, you sent that email, and then a month later, it was um the kid ended up, one of the kids ended up with cancer. It was just a drastic change, of like how he started teaching. I think that's part of it, but also like,
Yeah, after the kid got cancer, he changed the way he approached it for that
yeah,
that disaster or that family disaster. That kid happens to be Billy's boyfriend.
I didn't know if you wanted me like sharing personal details.
It's all right. So Dunbar is a great kid. He is halfway through his chemo treatments.
Yeah,
He's come back. He went from stage 3 um, Hodgkin's lymphoma to
hmm,
stage 1 now,
it's like in between stage two, stage one.
between stage 2 to stage 1. And it looks like he's on his path to a good
Hmm.
recovery and being a survivor of cancer. We're very hopeful that everything turns out great for him.
Yeah,
But he's a great kid. He's a great young man. He's not a kid. He's a young man, and he's got his whole future ahead of him. And I hope he's a part of our lives for a long time. So
Yeah.
he's a good kid, right?
Hmm.
A good person, a good human being. But Bailey got to see intimately like the difference in the response, and sometimes people just need that reality check.
Hmm.
And I think that's another important thing for fathers to understand too, right? Yeah, he improved his, but any person who goes through those moments where they are, where their reality doesn't match their thought process, right? Like, who in their right mind would say that an SAT is important when there's families out there without power, food?
Hmm.
Some of them didn't even have drinking water. They were living in hotel rooms. Who in their right mind would stress that everyone needs to be ready for the SATs?
Yeah.
But he had that reality check at that moment when we started responding and saying, hey, this isn't right. And as parents, it's important to recognize that we sometimes need the reality checks and that we can learn from it and grow from it. So I'm not angry with this man. At the moment, I was, but I'm happy he's taken the opportunity to become a better person himself, or at least refocus on what's important in life.
Hmm.
And sometimes being a leader is not necessarily about leading those that follow you, but sometimes being a leader is about just calling out what is true. And that's basically all I did for this man was I showed him what our truth was,
Yeah.
what the true situation was, and he took it from there. So Bailey, um, for fathers out there who are in their path, what is something that you would like to tell them to make the life better for their children? Something that you kind of wish I knew when I was younger, or something that you think we can all improve on as fathers?
It's just the idea of like growing with your children, not expecting them. Well, first off, not expecting them to be perfect the first go around. That is unreasonable, but it's also unreasonable to expect you to be perfect the first go around. It's like you guys grow together, you and your child.
So usually I don't ask them to compare themselves to their younger siblings. I like my children to be individuals, but I am going to ask her, what do you see today in the style that I do with the younger children you wish you had when you were younger?
They definitely seem a lot more comfortable to come to you with the more difficult questions. I remember being young, I was scared to ask you because, like, I've always been good at math, and that was something always, like, I don't know how to put this. Like, I was expected to be good at math.
So you showed on talent or kind of like the ability to be well at math, and you felt like that was the expectation that you're
Yeah.
always going to be good at math.
And so it was really hard for me to come and ask for questions with math. And, like, even now, if I don't understand something, it'll take me, like, failing a quiz to go to my teacher and ask for help to admit that I don't know this. Where with like Finley Grace, she's like, I'm great at reading, and you ask her about her math, and she's like, I'm not great at math.
Yeah, but Finley Grace is still willing to come to me
Yeah,
if she
that's what I'm
needs
saying.
help.
Like, she will come to you and ask for help. And Solomon, who is good at math, will come and ask and be like, hey, how does this work?
Because I don't have that authoritarian style, if I understand
Hmm.
what you're saying correctly, because I no longer have that authoritarian style, I allow them to be open to failure and to
Yeah.
share their failures with us because they're not afraid or they're not feeling shame or guilt in the sense that they're not meeting an expectation that I have for them.
Hmm.
And I think when you're younger, I made it very clear I had expectations and you were to meet them. And
Yeah.
if you didn't, there was going to be negative consequences.
Hmm.
Where the younger children don't necessarily have that idea where there's negative consequences, which allows them to kind of like continuously grow. Um, they have expectations, they have standards to meet, but I don't have to make it scary not to meet them,
Yeah.
right? Like we still meet standards, but when I correct them now, it's more, I feel like they respond in more respect and they do correct their
Hmm.
actions. But I also give them more freedom to fail.
Yeah.
So
But the other side of that is like with my art, I was never good at art as a kid. And that was just like kind of the expectation. So when I would work hard and change your expectation, it was like this. That's amazing. Filled me with this level of joy that I'm chasing like now when I do art of like not for you to say it looks good, but for when I step back and look at the piece, I think it looks good. And I'm not sure if I would have gotten that if it wasn't for the trying to seek that validation.
Well, that's an interesting look at it. I mean, there's definitely this. I kind of instilled in you guys like if you guys want something, you work hard, you can
Yeah.
strive a lot of those things, right? Not everything, right? There's some things that we can't strive no matter how hard we work,
Yeah.
and I lived that throughout the military career. There's times where I was told no by people that I couldn't overcome or
Hmm.
surpass, right? But I really put all my effort into it, and I always got better at what I was trying to get at, but I didn't always get what I desired or
Yeah.
sometimes even needed. I mean, I got what the Army was willing to give me. And for Bailey, I mean, there's a lot of things she's tried where she would show up and she wouldn't be naturally talented at it. But there's a lot of times, like her dancing, right? Her dancing, she showed up and she wasn't as graceful as her sister and she didn't have the natural talent. But Bailey was not going to be outworked by anyone else in that studio.
Hmm.
And by the time she left, I think they were both considered to be on the same level in a lot of ways. By the time they both left
By
dance,
everyone but the director,
yeah. Well, the director did
which
have
is part of why I left was the direct like I would go to a class and the teacher would be like, "Why are you in here? You should be in the level up." And so they would talk to the director and the director would be like, "No, she needs to be here." But the director never saw me dance.
right.
All she saw was the numbers on the paper and like she was there for the exam to see which class you had to be in. And I did not do in that well in that exam, as I've never done well on any test.
Right.
Like I'll do well on tests, but it's never to my full ability.
Right. Well, I think it's also important to remember when you're a hard worker is you may not do well in the initial exams, the pre-exams, but when you're a hard worker and you're somebody that really drives to like get better, you learn quickly and you advance quickly.
Well, I think that's what the teachers saw was that okay, she may not be at that level right now, but in a week or two she will be.
Like she picked up and surpassed the standard pretty quickly. And but she took that not just in dance, but she took that in her art. She took that in a lot of things. I mean, she wanted to be a microbiologist at one point, and when she developed the latex allergy and then the nitro allergy, there's not very many options to keep her hands safe in those environments. Or
Well, it wasn't even that. It forced me to stand back and look at what I really valued in life. And in looking at what I drew my joy from and what made me enjoy life, it was the teaching my siblings and it was the doing art and it was helping people. It wasn't like yes, chemistry was fun, but it wasn't the same level of satisfaction when I completed chemistry as it was when I made something I was proud of in art.
but even up to the point where you found out you were allergic to the latex
Mm-hmm.
and then the nitro, um, you still were chasing that dream, and it's. I think that moment, you're right. It made you look back and like,
Mm-hmm.
is this really something that's worth having my hands swollen for the rest of my life,
Yeah.
right? Or is there something other I can do in life where I can have an impact and still enjoy what I do? And I think she's going down a better path, probably more college expensive path, but we'll figure that out as we go. Maybe you guys can help by subscribing and liking it. All right. Um, help some of my kids to school.
Which
That,
actually, in the long term run of things, probably end up being cheaper because, like, even Bruton Parker, where I got that full ride, but Bruton Parker, the price of room and board and everything surpasses the price of a, like, tuition for AU. And with Bruton Parker, it's a full ride after the Hope Scholarship. So once I get the Hope Scholarship, it's not like it's a full ride. It's the full
so
ride minus the Hope
I think
Scholarship.
we miss a piece of context here. She got a full ride scholarship offer from Broome Parker.
Yeah.
We do share a lot of things, including a sense of humor, um, which I make fun of my daughters, right? And like in a little ways, they're all dating versions of me,
Mm.
but her boyfriend is the only one that will turn around and say that I feel like I'm dating you. Like because Bailey's so much like me in so many different ways that especially a sense of humor. He's like, you guys literally say the same jokes and just not
Well,
in the
what
same
was the
room with
other
each other.
day where mom was like talking about being an appraiser?
Yeah. So my wife, her mom, not my mom, her mom, my wife was talking about becoming an appraiser, and I'm like, what? So you can tell people what they're worth. So not even 4 hours later, we pick up Bailey from school, and Bailey gets in the car, and Christina announces very, like with a lot of pride,
Yeah.
right? Very loudly, "Oh, I'm going to be your appraiser." What comes out of Bailey's mouth? What? So you can judge people and tell them what they're worth? It was the exact same joke, like the
Yeah.
exact same line, just 4 hours apart, and all I could do was laugh at it. Like I was laughing, and my wife just rolled her eyes, and like, and in those type of moments, like you know that it's your own daughter, you can't help but notice, right? Like you're leaving an impact one way
Yeah.
or another. But it is those type of things that those type of stories that we get to share in, and especially now because we have a relationship where we can share things like that versus like before where she was my little gopher.
Yeah.
But is there anything you'd like to tell the audience before we sign off?
I don't know. I think I've said it all.
You don't want to say goodbye.
Oh, yeah. Bye.
All right. Thank you for listening to our show. Like I said earlier, you help pay for my kids' college. You know, hit the like, the support, the comment section, the subscribe. Just or just send me checks. I'll take checks. All my kids' colleges are going to be expensive. I mean, I hope you got something out of this, something valuable. Please share your ideas. If you want us to discuss something in the future, share that in the comments. Um, Let us all grow together into being better humans and better fathers and just better people all around. Thank you.